Hello, and welcome to The Best in Performance. This is an interview series where we sit down with the veterans and thought leaders of the web performance space, learn about the experiences that they've had, the lessons they've learned, the things they know now that they wish they had known, and get their thoughts on where things are going. This series is brought to you by Rigor. Rigor offers cloud-based web performance solutions designed to help teams find, fix, and prevent the speed and user experience issues impacting their websites and applications. You can monitor real browser user experiences and multi-step API flows, benchmark competitors from a simple, easy-to-use interface, and integrate performance optimizations directly into your CI/CD workflows to help your team get fast and stay fast. I'm Billy Hoffman, CTO at Rigor, and with me today is Alla Gringaus. Alla is a certified UX design leader and a practitioner with years of experience in the performance, technology, and UX design spaces. She's held leadership roles at a variety of companies, and she's even run her own consultancy. Alla, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Billy, for having me on your webcast. It's a great honor to be here with you.
So let's dive into that. You've had a really great career. Talk to me a little bit about some of the companies that you've worked with and what you did there.
Sure, absolutely. I've worked with pretty well-established media brands and large corporations such as Time Inc., currently Meredith, and the websites like People Magazine, Time Magazine, Sports Illustrated, Golf, Health, and many others. And later, I kicked off responsive design for Time Magazine first, and then I moved to The Economist and the American Kennel Club. In all of these organizations, I led front-end development and user experience, or both, with the emphasis on design patterns, design systems, responsive design, and mobile-first approach. And of course, with all of this work on my plate, I've always evangelized web performance because it was, at that time, there was all factual evidence that was proved that the fact that this speed is a lot more than a feature, it's actually a requirement.
Yeah, and I 100% agree with you. So fun fact, Alla and I have known each other for many, many years, and we have had this conversation so many times. I 100% agree. What I'm interested in is you and I agree. Inside those large organizations, you've got lots of different groups. You've got different web properties. You have different groups responsible even for delivering a single web property, like you mentioned, People or Time or American Kennel Club. How did you navigate those large organizations and kind of get everybody thinking about performance or being receptive to your message?
Of course. This is a great question, Billy. People are a lot more receptive to look at the content or something visual that paints in a browser than what's going on behind the scenes. So maybe let's start with content. Content is very important, as we know, and is appropriate. Content is appropriate for users when it helps them accomplish their goals. When they do accomplish their goals, it makes them feel great and critically important missions, offering them precisely what they need, exactly when they need it, and just the right form on the device of their choice of this content, right? So I'm talking about responsive design. So all of this requires that you get pretty deeply into your users' heads, and that's when I worked as a head of UX in all of these organizations. And some meaningful analysis that we performed of user context required a lot of, not only a lot of understanding of users' goals, but also their behaviors. So we really needed to dive deeply into users' heads. Somebody conducted actually an experiment and concluded that the delay in mobile load times is roughly equivalent to how you felt watching that horror movie, or maybe looked down over the cliff, and the stress that you get when you look down, unless, of course, unless you're a climber, Alex Honnold, who did a free solo, of course.
Yeah.
But other than that, you get pretty psyched from like just looking down the cliff. So the slowness of the pages when I worked with People magazine, Time magazine, and later Economist, American Cancer Club, it caused pretty high abandonment rate, and I was tasked always with the project to find out why. So when we launched, for example, at Time Inc., Sexiest Man Alive, you can imagine how popular it was, or Person of the Year, or swimsuit issue from Sports Illustrated. So when abandonment rate or exit rate is very high, the business loses a lot of, or doesn't reach the revenue goals. So I found that one of the biggest pain points that users experienced was not content and not how it looked and not how it painted, but the slowness of the websites.
Interesting. And what I loved what you were doing there, Alla, is that, you know, we as technology people tend to talk about the current awesome, sexy metric, like, oh, don't use start render, it's first contentful paint. Oh, it's not first contentful paint, it's time to interactive. But what you were talking about there, or here's how it paints, but what you were talking about there were business metrics, right? When the user gets the thing that they want, on the form factor that they need, it allows them to accomplish their goal, they're happy, they do more, they engage more. Did you find it was helpful when you're navigating these large organizations to try to frame the conversation in a broader context than just these sort of very specific performance-y things to get those other parts of the organization to listen to you?
Sure, that was actually the hardest part. And the key here is that you need to kind of speak what I call Rosetta Stone. You need to speak their language. So the stakeholders or executives like CEO, CMO, and CFO, and all these people, when they listen to you how important performance is, they don't understand the language of first time to interaction or something like that, right? But yeah, you need to kind of like use their language, and that's where Google developers site comes extremely helpful, as well as Steve Sauter's articles or Rieger's blog or many other people's that I can touch later. But I normally go to Google developers and kind of like try to transform and translate the technical talk to more friendly kind of user Rosetta Stone talk.
Alla, I loved that analogy of the Rosetta Stone, of translating the language of performance and these metrics into something that the business people can really latch onto and resonate. But of course, that means having the right metrics to maybe be tracking and talking with people about. And you know, there's a lot of different metrics from paint metrics and browser events like onload. What's your advice, given your experience of knowing what metrics maybe should apply in a given situation, or what should people be paying attention to?
Sure, this is a really great question. So I used my expertise to educate people about metrics. And because I was heading user experience, and there were some people who wondered, what do I do with performance? Because performance is actually user experience. So I would educate people on user experience metrics first, which is a bit different topic than metrics used in ad sales, marketing, development, or performance, because the user experience metrics reflect human behavior and attitude. But this is something a lot easier for people to understand because they are users.
So give me a great example of like a user experience metric that you found resonated when you talked about it like that.
Sure. So when I headed UX design, I had my team's UX KPIs, right? Just like in any agile environment, we had our objective key results and KPIs. So they were normally user UX metrics divided in two major categories, quantitative and qualitative. So quantitative are pretty easy to understand, like task succeed rate, like how long did it take to pay credit card, right? Or time spent on task, or use of search versus navigation. If somebody came to the website and they use search as opposed to navigation, it means that something is wrong with navigation, right? If they easily navigate. Or user error rate is a very easily arithmetics. Let's say you have 5 users and they have 1 task and they have only 7 opportunities for like to make a mistake, and you kind of calculate the average rate of making a mistake, and you say, okay, 64% of error rate, right? So you know where you need to work on UX. And qualitative UX KPIs, little different, but they more tied to performance, to speed perceptions, or perception of speed, what we say. And this is like qualitative is like speed perception or overall satisfaction, or what we call, let's say, first impression, or a few other impressions. Like, it's a known fact that if people didn't accomplish their goal in the first or second visit because the web page was too slow, they will never come back. So these are the UX metrics that I used to create people.
That's really interesting, because, you know, when we've talked with folks before, we dive right into particular metrics like, oh, like first contentful paint versus first meaningful paint. And don't get me wrong, I want to talk with you about those. But I love what you're doing there is that the
preparing.
Yeah, it's a means to an end. Like, did the user accomplish it? Did they get it on the device that they care about? Did they accomplish it? I love that thing about navigating versus searching, and that revealing where maybe you should be focusing on from a performance perspective. Like the search was the navigation was so slow and unresponsive and such a bad experience that the result is that they're using the search aspect way more than the navigation.
Right, they were forced to use search. And when when you talk about when you establish design culture and UX culture, it's kind of easier to follow along to performance, and that's where you start kind of like talking about, okay, let's see how to fix it, what's going on. So then you bring up, like, is it useful, right, question. And my favorite matrix is like first meaningful paint. It's like concept of usefulness.
Mm-hmm.
And when the user finds like the first time when the content becomes useful. So this is like first meaningful paint. And another one that I really like that directly also can be tied to user experience matrix is time to interactive. Remember I mentioned like use search versus navigation. If time to interactive, like until the user can actually start interacting with the page, is time to interactive. So these two metrics in UX and performance can be tied together. And at this point, setting the scene in UX and then moving along to performance is a lot easier than dropping a bomb of performance right away.
Yeah, really what you're kind of describing there is how to link these things together. And then that kind of gets to what we were talking about earlier, using that almost through your Rosetta Stone to kind of get people to understand this linkage and the importance.
Right.
Talk to me a little bit about building that culture of performance. You know, when we've talked to people in the past, some people say it's easy, a lot of people say it's hard. And the language barrier you talked about is only one aspect about it. Talk to me about how you like to build cultures of performances.
Sure, absolutely. Well, first of all, I was championing performance in every organization I worked in. I literally have very old presentations that I did like years ago, and some most recent ones at the American Kennel Club. So I use every opportunity to speak in like town halls or water cooler meetings. I establish water cooler meetings. And I make it very clear normally that today the brand where I work, or brands in general, have to create the greatest user experience to keep their clients engaged at all times. This is the overall user experience affects your audience impression on your brand. or impression of your brand. So no wonder Akamai has reported that 75% of online shoppers who experienced like delay in page load when they were shopping, they will never return to the site.
Yeah.
So this became sort of like key factor in creating brand credibility. And the hardest part was to fight, or not to fight, that's a wrong kind of negative word, to kind of a deal to handle different myths that every company had when I joined it. So some of the top myths, for example, one of the myths is that internet was designed for optimal performance. So the internet was built for resilience, but not for performance, right? And some more kind of like geeky kind of, developers, they say, oh, I'm not worried about it because, BGP, like the Border Gateway Protocol, will take care of everything. But said that Border Gateway Protocol does not follow the fastest path. It just makes one decision, which internet service provider is like to hand traffic off to next. So it ensures the routing resilience, but it doesn't address speed of performance. So, and like one of the, I'm just gonna say one more myth, like internet performance is good enough. Like everybody has an iPhone today. Like this is the worst, right? If you read books of like Maximiliana Fiert or Ilya Grigorik, my favorite high performance browser network, Ilya points to studies that consistently report the same human reaction to interaction delay across application types and devices. Like after 1 second threshold, the user has checked out mentally, and that's it. And at the 10 seconds, they just completely given up on a task, right?
Yeah.
So and this kind of behavior is directly tied to psychology of the user and speed, which is very important. And when you kind of build this performance based on confronting these myths and proving these myths wrong, people have aha moments, almost like eureka. They're like, oh, not everybody on the planet has iPhone.
I love that because it's about people have a perception of what performance means. And you and I have been in this space long enough to know how rapid that is. I mean, it was only many years ago, window onload was how we determined that was the extent of our performance monitoring. And now it's into render metrics or interactivity metrics or user timings where, hey, don't try to use a hero timing or don't try to use meaningful paint to try to figure out when the most important stuff happened or time to interactive to find out when the button click happened. It's let's go ahead and actually we'll tell you when the thing that we care about renders. There's so much maturing, and it's easy for people to sort of get in a rut or to have a preconceived notion about what they should care about performance. The one that I've heard quite a bit, which is similar to that whole, oh no, the network is built for speed, is that, oh, well, we have really fast connections now, so it doesn't matter. Or like
everybody has fast connection.
Yeah, exactly. Like, or everybody, or hey, that's great that you happen to have, hey, great, you've got an iPhone. Guess what? I go out and visit my folks in the mountains. I am not getting LTE.
Oh, yeah, guess what? It's not Rockefeller Center.
Exactly. And there was a fantastic presentation actually at the Perf Matters conference that I just saw where someone was saying, hey, like, here's the median speed in the US. Here's what the median speed in India is. And here's what the reports say, but here, if you look at, say, like RUM data, what it is, or if you look at like the telecoms, what they actually are providing, it's quite a bit lower. I think that myth busting and getting everybody on a common kind of ground to build that performance culture sounds like a key aspect. I think another side, going back to your Rosetta Stone, is that speaking the language. But let's talk about the business case and the ROI.
Sure.
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of studies that, will say, oh, here's what this did and here's what this did. And I find there's a lot of internal resistance of, well, we're not Amazon. I don't know if 100 milliseconds will save us. influencer. So how do you go about building that case for performance that's not a generic one, but that's specific to the organization you're inside of? How do you walk me through how you've built performance cases and how you've gotten that executive buy-in?
Sure. So whatever brand I worked for, be it Time Magazine or People or Economist, for example, and so forth, I think the hardest part was for me to kind of to get over with everybody else and to persuade people to believe in performance optimization was that they had monitoring tools, right? So the perception of monitoring tools was that another myth, like, oh, we have, I don't want to name any specific monitoring brands because I respect them very much. They have their purpose, but monitoring can solve, monitoring can help you find and diagnose problems, but it doesn't solve them.
Yeah.
It's, like it doesn't solve them. So the most sophisticated monitoring tool can alert you and give you enough data to diagnose what might be causing poor network performance, but it's not going to go and solve this performance. And that's where having not only monitoring, but optimization tools on your hands is very important. So it was like a lot of bottlenecks to kind of to go through, and how to build like this culture and convince people to invest into performance as one of the most important things is to provide return on investment research or analysis. Otherwise, CEO or CFO or any kind of marketing teams, they don't believe in anything until you show them dollar sign. So you need to kind of translate everything into, like, to monetize every step on the way. So to prove the real impact of potentially improved page load time, you need to first and most of all collaborate with all stakeholders to find out what are the numbers they consider most important in their department. So sales, customers report with dissatisfaction of the website performance, and less likely they will buy from that site. So talk to ad sales, talk to sales guys and find out how they monitor this, where they go to analytics and get these numbers. And then you know how to tie them together. Then mobile first, like user expect pages to load in less than 3 seconds these days. So go to analytics, live in analytics, find out what is the bottleneck that causes delay in a web page to delay the mobile first experience, and then monetize it. SEO is very easy to monetize. Well, that would be wrong to say. Like any SEO expert would kill me right now. But I did it so many times, that's why I say it. But on a very high level, SEO has been proven from 2010. It was like Google gave us, a hint that it counts speed of the web page into page rank a little bit. And now it's official that it's absolutely counted into algorithm for mobile experience, SEO, right? So 1 second in page load times, like additional to page load time, means 11% loss of page views. That's a very proven fact, and it's everywhere on the internet. Or conversions, like you can tackle conversions. 1 second delay means 7% reduction in conversions. And in that case, you collaborate with developers, with data scientists, or in a startup setting, you just change the heads and do it yourself.
Yeah.
You do like A/B test or multivariate test with or without something, like with performance built in or without performance, and then you compare the conversions, right? It's actually a very mathematical way of doing things because it's all about kind of mathematical equation. It's just diligence. It's little bit time consuming, and you need to be a little bit organized and kind of overcome your fear of failure or fear of speaking to the whole company if you want to establish the culture.
Yeah, I love that. So what I'm hearing is that you need to, number one, you can't just talk about the metrics. You need to understand what are the business metrics. So go find those stakeholders, find out what's important to ad sales, find out what's important to the different groups, and then go say, okay, well, to get the information of whether that's getting better or not, does that live in analytics? Does it live in a BI system? Like, where is that? Then go get it and start saying, well, here's where we are. Now, I think it's easy when you sort of say, look at all the performance opportunities that you could have, like you kind of mentioned optimization tools that can sort of tell you what you should improve or not improve. What happens? Where should somebody start? How do they, when they start maybe making optimizations and then wanting to see those business metrics get better, how do they make sure they're not biting off more than they can chew? How do they sort of approach this iteratively in baby steps?
Sure, of course.
How do you suggest folks do that?
So what I did, for example, how I approached performance optimization at The Economist, I took my own time to analyze performance of the most important page at that moment, because subscriptions were going down and there was some decline in subscriptions. So I took subscriptions page as one of the examples, and I have a pretty amazing story about how I presented subscription pages performance, and I sold it to the chief marketing officer. And for her, it was like, it was such a discovery. She had no idea that it was happening. When I showed her how long Economist loaded the subscription page. So I had to change everything around, right? If you look today on a subscription page, it's very sophisticated. It's very smart. It uses like psychology of the user to almost trick the user to buy like the best deal for Economist. But now they have playground to do anything they want in subscription page, but they don't have to deal with page delays. So at that time, I used Zoom, which you founded.
I did. Thank you for that.
I used Zoom, and Zoom broke down all performance issues of subscription page in 3 categories. And like one category was, this is for designers, this is for developers, and this is for ops, right? So when Zoom helped me for this page to organize immediately in a second, like who has to work on what, and I immediately submitted it it was connected to Jira, and I immediately, like everybody got their tasks on hands, and it was language that they understood. Designers said, oh, all of these images are too heavy, let me optimize them. And ops said, oh, maybe we need to place more like servers in these locations, because it looks like in this location it's failing, right? And the developers got their critical and like less critical, medium, and easy long-hanging fruit tasks to tackle. And I helped them to, because I was leading front-end development as well. So I kind of owned front-end and UX. It was like the best experience ever. When you own both, like you don't need to sell it to one another.
Yes.
Right. So my developers kind of like tackled the front-end issues, and boom, in a very short period of time, we proved direct return on investment. It was amazing.
That's great. And there's so much to unpack there. I'm so glad you brought that up, because you talked about yes, you used a tool. In this case, you used a tool, which is now part of Rigor, that was trying to identify specific things to optimize. But it's not about the tool. It was about getting that insight to the right people. Like you couldn't be telling IT operations about the really bloated hero images.
Right.
And
what do they know about image optimization? They're like, what? Or DevOps, or designers, what do they know about time to first byte? They're like, what? So you need to learn how to deliver the right tests to the right people.
And that gets back to the sort of the Rosetta Stone thing. I'm actually interested in something you said early on when you said, hey, look how bad The Economist subscription page is right now. When I've tried this in the past, people will be like, oh, that doesn't look so bad. So how did you sort of, I mean, you could tell them a number like, oh, it's 7 seconds for whatever.
Right.
It doesn't even matter. Like, it's 7. If it's not relative to a thing, they don't necessarily know how good or bad 7 is. How did you sort of, or was the number so big that they're like, oh God, that's a bad number? Or did you have to did you show it relative to something else? Or
yeah, I did. I kind of like bad for me, like I kind of like feel guilty, but at any cost I had to prove it. And there was not many tools back then, on hands. So I used webpagetest.org to create a video of this page on the slowest connection ever, almost like on modem.
Mm-hmm.
And then I would show them, you see, this is how long your page loads in a while. And they're like, what? Right. And yeah, I mean, I used anything, but of course I was honest, like that was really slow page. If page loaded 20 seconds, no wonder subscription suffered. But I use my methods to kind of present information in the most kind of, in the most empathetic and most impactful way.
And I've had similar conversations, and a pushback I always get when you say, hey, look how slow this is. And even when you show them a video, and even if you show them a video of, here's a competitor, they're loading better than you, that's usually pretty powerful. But I often will get pushback, which is, oh yeah, but our page has all this functionality. And look at all this great stuff we're doing. And if you want my site, if you want this to be fast, we're going to have to somehow make it less functional. Talk to me a little bit about how you kind of balance the performance with, how can you have a fast site that is functional too? And how do you sort of balance that performance with the design and the capabilities of the page?
Sure. So in order to kind of talk about, it's kind of, you're right. It's very hard to talk to business about how neglecting site speed in today's internet age is a fatal mistake, because they all work on a terabyte connection. And when they go home, they have probably they have pretty high speed at home. But I used other means to measure performance and to show statistic, like more kind of big data information. For example, I used user testing company. I used like 30 days trial, which gave me like full functionality of user testing. And I recorded the videos with specific questions. And I selected locations like Rwanda, Uruguay, I don't know, because, Economist or American Kennel Club, they have visitors from all over, mostly in the United States. But I would select some really kind of hard to reach, no CDN kind of locations, and this tests to those locations, proving that our users are not necessarily all in Rockefeller Center. They're not necessarily all in the center in downtown of Chicago or San Francisco. There are mountains and fields and villages and all kinds of, and buses and cafe and all kinds of things where people don't have fast connection. So I literally recorded the videos of people where they said, what, I can't wait anymore, how long, what, forget it, and when I showed a few videos like that, it was very impactful. But then I also used tools, UX tools, called, one of them, for example, Hotjar. It shows you the heat map where people stay most of the time when they land on this page, and it shows you at what point they bail out. So I collected all of this information in a big. It's a little bit of time. I have to say, nothing is easy, but depending on how resistant your stakeholders are, You have to do more work or less work.
Yeah.
If you're lucky, you do a little bit less work. If you're not very lucky, you have to do a little bit more work, but you have to think about your users, right? Because performance, like Tammy Everts, who now works for SpeedCurve, and by the way, she also monitors WPO stats, which is amazing. So Tammy said performance is not about technology, it's about people.
Mm-hmm. You know, Alla, with all this conversation, it strikes me where should people start thinking about performance?
Sure. So in the old days, people thought about performance afterwards. And as we know, it's a lot harder to reverse engineer your mistakes after it's already built, and it's a lot more expensive to go back. So at the least, the performance, just like you have style guide built into design, right? And you have, you know in advance what kind of framework you're gonna use or libraries you're gonna use in front-end development. Performance needs to be built into product development stages. So when you start with product discovery, user research, then you have iterative design and product launch. So in a product discovery, everybody must understand in the very beginning, the performance is as important as how your website looks and how pretty your font is and how effective your layout is and everything else. Performance comes first. Nobody cares about how pretty your website is if they never got to it.
Yeah, or if you're loading in, I don't get to see how great your typography is if you're loading so many fonts. I'm staring at unstyled content, or worse, I'm staring at no content because it won't paint till it gets the fonts.
Exactly, right. But once it's built into the process of product discovery, and performance is kind of like is requirement, like I said, it's not one of the features at the end, then everybody constantly thinks about performance in all phases of agile product development stages.
I love this. I want to dive into this a little bit more. So if it's got to be part of this process, let's say I'm a product manager, because sometimes I do that. Some would say poorly, but so I'm defining a new feature, right? Like we're gonna, have a new image carousel on American Kennel Club. And I'm sort of defining, there's functional requirements, right? Like it has to be able to do X and Y and Z. How do you suggest I sort of design in almost performance or UX requirements into that so it can be part of the life cycle?
Right. So during the phase when you sell performance as a requirement, not as a feature, you must establish performance budget. So establishing performance budget, you let everybody know, okay, we can have a little bit kind of like on and off here and there, but this is the budget. And our page cannot be more than this, like number of kilobytes, and where we can play around with the internal kind of like assets within the page. Not too much, because JavaScript is not just kilobytes, as we know. It's also parsing and execution and everything else. And image loading is not just how much this image weighs in kilobytes. It's also huge latency that people overlook most of the time. But you need to kind of like play around in this equation, but you need to stick with it. You need to stay within the performance budget. And performance budget should also include things like metrics, right? The first time to first interactive, like how soon you want users to get to that submit or login or register button, CTA, and first meaningful paint. How soon you want users to see, oh, wait, I'm willing to wait. It looks interesting. Now I understand, right? So all of this boils down to understanding performance metrics and setting the performance budget.
I like how concrete that is. So and when I talk to people about this, they get performance budgets. They've read Tim's great work in this.
Public, money,
But one of the things that I hear is, awesome, what should my budget be? because they might look at a stat or a study that says, oh, hey, you should try to get a first contentful paint that's here. And they're like, well, right now I'm at 9 and you're telling me I should be at 2. So like, that would be great. I'd love to be a 2, but I'm a 9. So how do you define either whether it's a size budget or whether it's, to your point, like a timing metric budget? How do you go about having people sort of define that initial budget so that it's realistic but aggressive? And then how do you suggest people sort of refine it and improve it over time?
They need to understand that everything, when it comes to technology in general and to performance specifically, is about simple equation. It's a very, very simple, like fifth, maybe third grade equation. You have total size of a page, and you have size of images that you're uploading, and you have number of HTTP requests, and you have JavaScript and CSS. So if you go way over it, like over your limits, then something's gotta give. So when you set performance budget, you specifically asked about carousel. Yes, you can have carousel, no problem. But if your carousel prevents the user from getting to the to interact with the page, then maybe you need to reconsider carousel. Or maybe carousel slides themselves have CTAs, call to action buttons. So it's you need to look at the context of the design. But a few things that you need to constantly keep in mind when you're talking about performance budget is you need everybody, not just you as a designer, and not just me as a performance developer or some kind of performance guy on a team. Everybody, the whole team, needs to know some way in a documentation what's the maximum size of the images we're willing to upload to our website. What is the total number of HTTP requests allowed on the page? What's the maximum page weight totals, like all of them? And we need to set the thresholds to achieve a good speed index, right? And limits on JavaScript, CSS, website, and then it goes on and on and on,
Sure.
right? You can use you can use prefetch, pre-connect, preload, hints, and all other things. But budget should be shared across all teams who work on a website. And in that case, everybody's aware of that. But if you come up with the budget at the end of the process and people are surprised, then it's your mistake that you didn't bring it up sooner.
And I love that idea that's getting us back to that life cycle approach, right? Like, it's not the IT people that are like trying to apply a budget. It's got to be the people who are building and testing the thing.
Yes.
I love this focus on performance budgets, Alla, because I think it's something everybody can sort of just, they get it, whether they're performance people or not. Everyone has financial budgets, right? Their household budget. So performance budgets make a lot of sense. And I like how you coupled it back to, this isn't something IT ops should be thinking about because it's too late. It's something the designers and the developers and the QA people, the budget has to be done across the life cycle. And I think people watching our video here, they're going to get it. They're going to say, yes, budgets, awesome, give me those. But an aspect they're going to need to get started is knowing what the value should be. What should my total weight, allowable weight be? Or what should my total JavaScript be or a metric be? What are some methods you recommend to your clients or the jobs you've done in the past on how to come up with what those initial budgets should be?
Sure, there are a lot. This is a great question again. I normally don't do anything unless I perform competitive analysis.
Okay.
Right, because that's the first. You asking executive question, right? This is what any executive in a company would ask me right away when I say, no, the page should be 3 megabytes total altogether and no more than that. And they're going to say, why? Where did you get this number? Right? It's like, who told you such a silly thing? And I need to be prepared, not just prepared, but I need to be equipped with the answer and with all reports and data and provide them immediately to the stakeholders with a full proof why I set up this performance budget. So I have 3 different methods to kind of like to answer this question. One of them is I always perform competitive analysis, right?
Mm-hmm.
Compare myself against similar domain services. Second, you use something like more automated tool like Rigor or SpeedCurve or some other tools that allows you to perform benchmarks, where you can put together unlimited number or maybe limited number of similar services and compare them against each other. I've always done it, always. Whenever I was selling performance to stakeholders, competitive analysis was given. I always compared Time magazine to CNN or to The Economist and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the most important ones that I use all the time, and everybody is using it, is HTTP Archive.
Yeah.
So HTTP Archive is, once again, it's founded by Steve Souders, and it helps us track how the web is actually built. So HTTP Archive crawls the millions of websites on the web and records detailed information about all the fetched resources. It's like Wayback Machine records snapshots of all of the websites in the world. They have certain use, of course, and you can go like 15 years ago and see how, you know, CNN looked 15 years ago. Be prepared to laugh, right? But the same thing is HTTP Archive. It's sort of like it's archive. It crawls all of the pages, crunches and analyzes data to identify the trends, and then unicorn performance engineers use BigQuery to query HTTP Archive, get more information that it presents by default. But if your brand goes against, like, okay, and a very average, right? Nobody wants to be average among like 100 million websites or 10 million websites. I want to be number one. What do you mean average?
Yeah.
But if your numbers are way above even average, something is wrong. So that's what you use to kind of stimulate, like use as a stimuli to sell performance metrics.
So what I'm hearing is that it's number one, competitors. Number two,
know your competitors.
Yeah, benchmark. And number two, maybe not necessarily direct competitors, but similar spaces, other people in adjacent spaces. And then three, you're kind of getting it's almost each layer is a little further out. Direct competitors, nearby, you know, And then finally, like the big whammy is HTTP Archive, which is looking at everything.
Big data, right.
Awesome. Yeah, let's throw some big data machine learning cryptocurrency at this. So Alla, my final question here is, given all this great information that you've learned, and like we've talked about so many great topics here, performance budgets, integrating things into the life cycle. I love the Rosetta Stone. Out of all of that, I'm going to ask you a very hard question. What's the one thing you wish you could take back and tell Alla, just starting and just sort of gaining that insight into the importance of performance for the business? What's the one thing that you wish you knew now, or you wish you knew then that you know now, that you think would have really helped make things a lot easier for you?
Oh, I wish I could avoid doing all the manual work in the beginning and kind of like manually using spreadsheets and kind of what kept me up all night, kind of scrapping with my pen and all the spreadsheets and notebooks, all the data. I wish I had some kind of automated solution to all of this, which I have right now. And that's why I'm saying that it's almost a crime not to take care of performance these days, because it affects everything. It affects bottom line of business. It affects users who need information right now. It affects energy on the planet, because a lot more energy is being used. It just affects so much. Like, performance engineers are unicorn geniuses, like those that I know, those that I look up to, and those that I read from. And I wish I had all of this information back then, but I went through all of this until I got to the point that I finally say, okay, I still don't know anything, but at least I feel a little more comfortable talking about performance.
I can't think of a better way to end it than knowing that, sharing with everybody that it's so much easier to get access to this information now, and use it. Take advantage of it. Take advantage of the Best in Performance interview series. Take advantage of the HTTP archive. Get involved in the community. It's a great way to learn and grow.
And just to add, just 2 words, even though you didn't ask me this question. Every week you can come across some deeply insightful posts about new practices, test results, discoveries, opinions that affect everything you've ever known about performance optimization and page load. So you have to handpick and some of the best long reads across the web, as well as short reads. They're equally valuable, and they all live in an intersection of design, information architecture, back-end, front-end, databases, infrastructure, networks. So I personally follow the greatest. First of all, I'm lucky, with people I work with is super smart in performance, but I follow also the greatest minds on the internet, the best unicorns, such as Steve Souders, Tammy Everts, Ilya Grigorik, Yov Weiss, Andy Davis, Eddie Asmani, Tim Kadlik, Vitaly Friedman, Smashing Magazine, HTTP Archive, WO Stats, and so forth. Like all of these things, you have to consume a healthy mix of ideas on how to build a better quality, accessible websites with speed in mind.
Absolutely. I agree. Alla, thank you so much for joining us on the Best of Performance today. It's been a real pleasure having you.
Thank you so much for having me here.
For all of you out there, this is one of many exciting episodes we have queued up for this season. We hope you found this as valuable as we enjoyed producing it. If you'd like to follow along with the next episodes, check out this link for more episodes as they're published. We'll see you next time, and until then, get fast and stay fast. Okay.
That was awesome.
All right, I'm gonna go ahead and
Hollywood actor. Can we stop for a second?
Sure.
I got the blank.